Greetings, everybody. I just was so moved by La Ultima Cuerda. That was so beautiful. Let's give them one more round of applause. Thank you. Welcome to your world. Your world. That's the crucial thing here. You are inheriting this planet. You have every right to be counted, empowered, and protected by your adult mentors. All of you have been selected and have arrived here because you've shown exceptional leadership ability. And you're all here because you show star power for solving some of the world's greatest and most pressing challenges. So let's give you a round of applause. Never let anyone tell you that you're too young and too inexperienced to change the world. Anyone that tries to tell you that is either jealous or insecure, and in truth, they're probably both. Your youth and your energy is your greatest asset. Never let anyone transform that into a liability. As Karen mentioned, I'm Clara Vondrich, and I'm the director of Divest-Invest Philanthropy, which is the foundation arm of the global fossil fuel movement that is sweeping the world and really shaking up power structures. As of last December at the Paris Climate Talks, we announced over 500 institutions around the world managing assets in excess of over $3.4 trillion have agreed to divest their portfolios from fossil fuels. But I want to actually start with what's really important. I'm Clara, but I'm not defined by my profession. Today, I choose to define myself by how much I can love. How much do you love? Who do you love? What do you love? And how do you love them? If you can answer these questions, and if you can answer them honestly, your life will become unimaginably simple, beautiful, and straightforward, unfolding like a blossom over time. When I was a kid, I never felt comfortable in any church. Nature was my church. My parents are immigrants from former Czechoslovakia, and they came here during the Prague Spring of 1968 when the communists came and crushed the incipient democratic uprising. They worked really hard, and they built a really comfortable life for myself and my brother right outside of Washington, D.C., where I was raised. We were really into nature. We were really into athletics. We took a lot of trips into nature where I really felt the presence of God. We traveled to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado and Utah. We went to Niagara Falls in Canada. We went to my family's ancient forests, the primeval forests in Bohemia, where we would pick mushrooms and look at all the animals that we didn't have back in the States. Always in between these trips, which of course were only once or twice a year when we had vacations, the rest of the time they were working very hard. But in between these trips, we had the magical benefit of being right next to one of the U.S.'s most pristine natural places. It's called Great Falls Park in Virginia. And I would go there growing up amidst the creeks and all the animals. And that was really where I got my first education, was learning what nature did, how it looked, how she behaved. And that was always where I felt the most enlivened and the most happy. My mom always used to tell us the story of her grandparents growing up on a mill in Czechoslovakia where nothing was wasted. They would literally use every little piece of foil and aluminum and plastic wrap until it fell apart. The US never got that memo. It's true, I hail from the land of McDonald's, plastic bags, throwaway culture, supersize me. Would you like a bag for that bag? You literally go to the store and they ask you if you want a bag for your bag. No, I don't want a bag for my bag. In the 1980s, my household started talking about climate change. My mama always had these super powerful antennae that could suss out what was vital and what was urgent. And even before James Hansen, the famous climate scientist, even before he first gave his stunning testimony to the world in 1988 before a joint session of Congress that human beings were unequivocally and categorically warming the planet with their emissions of fossil fuels, my mama knew. But I was still a teenager. I was just entering adolescence. There were much more important things to worry about, like boys and music. So I really kind of had to put that seed into germination for a little while. It was planted, but I had to wait. And that seed really started to bloom and blossom when I entered college. And it was there that I decided to pursue a science degree in neuroscience. And this is also a very interesting part of my story because I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. But I always seized the opportunities in front of me, and I went for what seemed interesting. It was in college that I met Bob Jacobs, who was a neuroscientist from Los Angeles, who brought that department into my school 2 years before I arrived. And it was there that he taught me to be fascinated by the nooks and crannies of this yet uncharted landscape, the human brain. So that's another lesson for all of you. Always, always be on the lookout for your teachers. They're just waiting out there, but you just have to listen and you have to seize the opportunities when you find them. If you hear somebody say something that's interesting, invite them to coffee, take them to lunch. Ask what makes them tick. Winthrop and Joyce were really kind. I asked them to assess from you guys, what are some of the challenges that you face? And what are some of the questions that I might share my experience about? And one of them was just on this point. The question goes, everyone says follow your passion, but what if I haven't figured that out yet? It's okay. Don't worry. Be open. Be receptive. That's the most important thing that you can do, and the answers will come. Jumping on opportunities, I've been able to winnow the field of all my different interests over the years so I could get to where I am now. And that is a place where I have one plan, one purpose, certain that I'm supposed to use my vital energy in service to helping this poor planet. So let's talk about that for a second, where we are and what it means for you. And I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. It's bad. It's really bad. The climate crisis threatens the fundamental rights and security of all living beings on the planet, including humans. It rains the worst impacts on the least fortunate among us, the people in the developing world that have done the least to contribute to the climate crisis. Think of just the people in Bangladesh, 30 million of whom will be forced to flee their lands as the seas envelop their only home. Unless Americans think, oh, well, not in my backyard, know this. In 15 years, parts of Miami are going to be uninhabitable. By 2100, all of Miami will be underwater. New York City, San Francisco, New Orleans, those will be the 22nd century's lost cities of Atlantis. The crisis is global, systemic, endemic, and total. No one will be spared, not animals, not plants, not the great apes, including humans. 80% of the Caribbean coral reefs are already gone. By 2050, the rest will follow. In Africa, their most beautiful prized elephants, there are 400,000 of them left today. They are being killed at a rate of 30 to 35,000 a year. If you do the brutal math, that means in 10 years, there will be no more African elephants. Americans are so funny, and I guess I have to count myself as one as I was born there, but they put terrorism as the #1 threat, and they put climate change somewhere on the bottom list of the priorities. But what, I ask you, is more terrifying than frying our only home? But there is a solution. There is a solution. Inspired and activated by youth, people of conscience around the world are using their power and influence to weaken the fossil fuel industry, the one that has unapologetically been driving this crisis through lies, deception, and money for decades now. We have just a few years left to change the trajectory of destruction and suffering. But standing here before you right now, I can tell you with full confidence that the tide has turned. Whether or not it is turning fast enough to avert the worst catastrophes is the only question now. The changes needed are nothing short of revolutionary. We have to transition the entire global economy from coal, oil, and gas to sun, wind, and water. As you may or may not know, the cost of renewables are finally at cost parity around the world with fossils. That means they're as cheap or cheaper to use than fossil fuels. And that's a huge game changer. Just over 5 years ago, my movement, the climate movement, it was crushed. We were literally hopeless. We had spent billions of dollars into top-down policy prescriptions, namely a global climate deal in Copenhagen, and then a huge push for domestic legislation for cap and trade at home in the US. These were the ultimate scaled solutions. If we could get a global climate deal, of course, we would be saved. If we could get a huge domestic bill passed that would effectively put a price on carbon, that would be a game changer. But it didn't work. They failed. Billions were poured into these top-down initiatives. Why did they fail? They failed because we left the most important asset on the table, the most important form of capital. And that was human capital. That was people power. That was activism. So into this vacuum came my movement, the fossil-free Divest-Invest movement. Launched on a handful of college campuses in 2011, this movement has now spread to sectors as diverse as philanthropy, cities and pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, banks, and faith organizations. As I mentioned, in Paris last year, over 500 such institutions had made some form of divestment commitment. The students that got their start in 2011 when the climate movement was crushed, they were supported by a number of visionary philanthropists. And one of them was my boss, Ellen Dorsey, who's actually the founder of something called, or the executive director of the Wallace Global Fund. And youth, as I mentioned, you guys have the power, the energy, all of it is going for you, but sometimes you need a little bit of a boost, and sometimes you need a little bit of added credibility from a very serious institution like philanthropy. So it was really this marriage between philanthropy and youth that was the game changer. And the magic of divestment is that we all have something to divest. We all can be part of this movement. It's the most democratic movement that's around. If you're part of a church, or you live in a city, or you belong to a university, you can go to your college campus, you can go to the head of the endowment, you can say, please, it is unethical to invest in the fossil fuels that are baking our planet. And more so, it's increasingly becoming clear that it's financially stupid. You may have noticed that the stocks of the fossil fuel companies have been in turmoil in the past 5 years. Coal stocks have lost over 95% of their value. Anyone that tells you that you should be investing in coal at this point needs to get their head checked, cabeza. They need to get their cabeza checked because the stock market has spoken and coal is dead. Oil and gas are going to be a lot more of a bumpy ride. We still have a few more years until we see peak oil and the full transition to electrified vehicles, but it is happening. One of the most important reasons that our movement has been so successful, in addition to the power of the youth, is that we have the power of analytics at our side. In 2012, a global NGO called the Carbon Tracker Initiative published a seminal analysis on the carbon bubble. And it goes like this. Mapping the world's fossil fuel reserves of coal, oil, and gas, and then putting them up against the climate science, namely we cannot warm the world more than 2 degrees, it becomes evident, completely clear, no bones about it, that 4/5 of all those reserves have to stay in the ground. They can't be burned, or the planet's cooked. So it follows, and it's a bit convoluted, so please stay with me. It follows that if companies like Exxon and Chevron and Total are counting these reserves that can't be burned on their balance sheets, it follows that those stock prices are actually grossly overvalued. This is known as the carbon bubble, much like the housing bubble of 2008, 2009. Once the markets internalize this fact that those reserves have got to stay in the ground, that bubble will burst and trillions will be lost. So the prudent investor, university, city, pension fund, whatever, is getting out of fossil fuels now before the carbon bubble bursts. And this is working. We have so many institutions that are walking the walk, including the Melton Foundation, which I wanted to commend personally from the bottom of my heart for joining us this past summer. You became our 145th foundation, and we are so grateful to you and for your leadership. And being here now and watching what you do with these young people, I'm especially indebted to you, Winthrop. So why is it that our movement is so powerful? Why is it so effective? Why is it being hailed as one of the most important climate campaigns of our generation? It's so powerful because it goes to the belly of the beast. It goes to the money. It goes to the money, honey. We're moving capital from the past and into the future. Just last week in New York City, it was Climate Week, and we announced that the first United States bank had divested from fossil fuels. If we're starting to get the banks moving, you know that change is coming. And the youth, you all, you started it. You started it all, and your energy will continue to take it forward. Let me pause here to respond to another question from you. It went something like this. Global challenges are so huge. How can I feel that I'm making a difference? Do you feel that you're at that point? First, my answer is 1,000 times yes. But this question also embeds a cautionary tale and one that's related to the issue of scale. So much, too much emphasis is put on this idea of scalable solutions. Of course, we all want to have outsized reach and outsized impact. But remember the billions of dollars that were poured into that top-down climate bill and the US legislation? They failed. They were the ultimate solutions of scale, but they failed. So conversely, what's working? Students organizing their own campus communities, faith leaders taking the Divest-Invest question to their personal congregations, city officials and pension trustees looking at their holdings and discovering they can make more money in supporting a sustainable future that works for the many and not just for the few. Insurance companies doing the same thing, and now banks getting smart about the carbon bubble and leaving fossil fuels before that bubble bursts. Change begins at home. Change begins in your community. Tend to that garden. Make sure its flowers are sweet. Related is the issue of teachers. Cultivate a few key relationships with leaders in your community. Find that mentor, that benefactor that gets your vision, that wants to help you see it through. Have their back and know they have your back too. Among my mentors now is Ellen Dorsey, whom I mentioned, the head of the Wallace Global Fund. She's a global powerhouse of this movement. If you ever get a chance to see her speak, I highly recommend it because she will shake you to your core. It was really her vision as a student of the South African divestment movement during apartheid that led to the spark of this whole campaign now. Ellen is honest with me, often brutally so. And one of my hardest lessons is to accept that critique with a smile. I can take it so personally. But really, that is the root of so much unhappiness and confusion in this world. This idea that we are what others say we are, or what we have in terms of our material possessions or what we do. But we're actually not any of that. We're actually just waves on this infinite ocean of changeless being. And once you can find that stillness, that small, still voice inside you, none of that critique matters. But it's still important to take it, and to take it with a smile. You process it honestly, you take what works and what applies, and you leave the rest. Everyone has opinions. You have to decide in light of your own values and your own goals what it is you will accept and what you will reject. Just this past Friday, Ellen gave me a huge piece of advice. She said, map your strategy and stay the course. As new projects, proposals, and people and ideas cross your desk, ask yourself this: is it consistent with my vision, and will it further my strategic objectives? If not, let it go. Life is way too short to try to do it all. My favorite definition of multitasking is doing many things badly at the same time. Don't do it. Don't do it. But today, saying no is easier said than done. We live in this age of information overload where constant tsunamis of data are flooding our brains at every moment. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels like you have to do it now. So how do you separate the reality from the illusion? I can only tell you what's worked for me, and that is taking 5 minutes every day to sit still with myself and meditate. I thought so long about what call to action I would leave you with. How would I ask you to further this amazing campaign that is making waves around the world? Asking you to focus or launch a divestment campaign in your own community was the obvious choice. But I actually think that the one thing that will have outsized impact now and into the future is just by asking you all to take 5 minutes a day to meditate. Try it for 40 days. At the end of that 40 days, ask yourself, what do you love? Who do you love? How do you love? And then just make a plan for living that love every day for the rest of your lives. Thank you so much.